She's just a brass picker." The mocking voice rang out across the scorching Fort Irwin range. Young soldiers burst into laughter, pointing at the scarred woman of war, quietly bending down to collect each spent shell casing. But what they didn't know, etched on her wrist was a date, and in her eyes lay a distance of 3,285 meters, where a lone white target stood frozen in the desert. In just one more moment, the entire base would witness the truth. This was no janitor, but a forgotten legend. The desert wind whipped across the barbed wire fence, carrying with it the scorched scent of Mojave sand. On the Fort Irwin range, the midday light poured down on every golden grain of dust, blurring the space like a trembling painting. Boots crunched against gravel with a dry crackle. There, among dozens of figures in camouflage uniforms, a small woman bent low, gathering one brass casing after another, their metal glint catching the Sunday. Angela Ruiz, 34 years old. A name that had all but vanished from training rosters, combat reports, or parade ceremonies. In the military record, she had once been a sergeant, a sniper providing cover for an infantry unit in Afghanistan, twice hospitalized from shrapnel tearing through her shoulder and leg. Twice honored with the Purple Heart, the medal of those who bled for America. But now, those medals sat quietly in a wooden box in a makeshift barracks room. And she was just a contract worker, doing the jobs no one noticed, mopping the mess hall floors, hauling trash, and ironically picking up brass casings for the recruits after each practice. The young soldiers looked at her with eyes half pity, half contempt, the gaze of those who had never seen combat but thought they knew what glory meant. When they saw her crouched under the blazing sun, the metal bucket rattling with brass shells, they whispered, then burst out laughing. Washed up old soldier. Thought she was a hero, but look at her now picking up garbage. Angela heard it all. The words rang clear in the dry desert air, like nails hammered into brittle wood. But her eyes never left the ground, and her calloused hands patiently gathered each shining shell, dropping it into the bucket. The metallic clink-clink echoed on a monotonous music only she could hear, like a reminder of something far away. She rarely answered back. Not because she didn't hear, but because there was no reason left to argue. Here, no one cared what she had once been. To them, the present was the only truth, and the truth was that she, a scarred woman of war, was nothing more than a quiet shadow. Sometimes, an older officer passing by would recognize the familiar face. They would nod slowly in greeting. But they, too, turned away quickly, because in a training base full of ambition and competition, paying attention to an old janitor gained nothing. Angela knew that, and she expected nothing more. She simply did her work, leaving as little trace as possible. In the mornings, she arrived earlier than anyone else, checking the range before the recruits came. She picked up casings, cleared dry brush, reset the targets. At times, when no one was watching, she would stand still for a moment, eyes fixed on the horizon. Out there, more than 3,000 meters away, the white-painted targets shimmered under the Sunday. To others, they were just lifeless boards. To her, they were reminders of the days lying motionless on Afghan dunes, when even a long breath could decide the survival of an entire squad. But those memories, she kept to herself. She didn't tell, didn't boast, didn't explain. The young soldiers didn't need to know, and truthfully, they didn't want to. To them, Angela Ruiz was just a name attached to cleaning work. The Purple Hearts, if they even existed, were probably just strokes of luck on the battlefield. Every now and then, she laughed quietly to herself. A bitter humor, like a dose of painkiller. She thought, if there were a competition for picking up brass casings the fastest, maybe she'd have another medal to hang on the wall. But the smile faded quickly. What remained was silence, thick as the desert air. One noon in the mess hall, while she wiped down tables, a few young soldiers stomped in, boots echoing. As they passed, their whispers were pitched just loud enough for her to hear. That's the Purple Heart lady? Looks more like a maid. Angela didn't look up. Her hand kept moving the rag in steady strokes. But her spine stiffened slightly, as if someone had pressed a finger against an old scar. She knew everything had changed. In war, she was a comrade, a shield, the sniper guarding her unit's flank. In peace, she was only a background figure. No one asked what she had endured, whom she had lost, or what she carried in her heart. They only saw a middle-aged woman with calloused hands, quietly cleaning so the next day's training could begin without fuss. That feeling of being pushed to the margins wasn't something everyone could endure. But Angela stayed. Every afternoon, as the sun drained from the desert sky, she carried the bucket of brass back to storage. The shells rattled against the handle, mingling with the wind moaning through the fence. To others it was nothing. To her it was like a heartbeat, still alive, still indebted. Inside, she was not weak as they thought. She simply chose silence. Silence so no one could see what was stored behind eyes that had stared down 1,000 rifle scopes. Silence so no one could read the memories. She carried the memories of those who had fallen, leaving her to survive. Day after day, Angela existed at Fort Irwin like a shadow, a minor character in the loud canvas of the training ground. But some shadows, when the light hits just right, leave a mark on the wall sharper than anyone else. Alright, before you settle in, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're genuinely vibing with what I'm putting out here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe. Desert afternoons always stretched longer than expected. The sun refused to release its grip on the range, clinging to every grain of dust, every white target standing motionless in the distance. After training hours, soldiers drifted away, leaving behind a scatter of brass casings across the sand. Angela bent down once more, patiently gathering them, as if it were an endless ritual. A group of young soldiers passed by, laughing loudly. Their boots pounded the dry, brittle ground as though determined to crush the silence. One elbowed another and muttered, "Look at her. Probably spent the war hiding, that's why she's got time to pick up our brass now." The group roared with laughter. Angela didn't raise her head. Only the corner of her mouth curved faintly, a smile so thin no one could tell whether it was mockery or acceptance. But as they turned their backs, one curious recruit glanced again and caught sight of a faded tattoo on her left wrist. The numbers 1119 shimmered faintly in the setting Sunday. He frowned, as if he had stumbled upon a mystery. None of them understood, but for someone versed in battlefield history, it was no casual decoration. Angela tugged down her sleeve and continued her work as if nothing had happened. Yet in that instant, a shard of memory from Afghanistan surged back, choking dust, gunfire, November 19th. Angela's quarters were small, the paint peeling from the walls, containing only a folding bed, a wooden table, and an old box placed neatly on the shelf. At night, when the base had gone quiet, she often sat alone, opening that box. Inside were no riches, no medals, only old brass casings, dulled and worn, arranged carefully like a strange collection. Each casing was a memory, or rather, a name. A comrade who had fallen, never to return. Angela lifted them one by one, wiping gently with a soft cloth, her motions slow, as if dusting off a cherished photograph. Her eyes traced each scratch, each tiny dent, recalling the sound of the round leaving the barrel, the cries, the frantic radio calls. At times, she chuckled softly at the foolish jokes her comrades once cracked in the middle of battle. The smile faded quickly, leaving only shadowed eyes. No one at the base knew. No one asked about the small wooden box, nor did they care why a Purple Heart woman chose such menial work. Angela never explained. She kept the truth to herself, the way she kept those shells. They were not beautiful, not polished, but they were heavy with meaning. Once, when the desert wind howled fiercely, Angela placed the box on the table, opened the window, and let the sunset paint the shells crimson. The darkened brass reflected flickering streaks of light, like invisible memorial candles. She thought to herself, if anyone walked in now, they'd probably sneer. But to her, it was the only way to speak to those who remained behind. The numbers 1119 on her wrist had been inked in her last year in Afghanistan. That day, her unit was ambushed in a narrow canyon. Angela held the support position, scope pressed hard into her shoulder, heartbeat so loud she could hear it in her ears. Rounds whistled overhead. She saw comrades fall, one after another, the pleas for help drowned beneath machine gun fire. When night came, she survived. Half her unit did not. 1119 was the day they left her behind. She never explained it to anyone. It was a vow of silence. For her, silence spoke louder than any speech could. At Fort Irwin, people saw only a quiet laborer. But beneath that sunburned skin lay overlapping memories, wounds that never closed. The old wooden box, the faded shells, the numbers on her wrist, all clues to a woman who had once stepped out of war's inferno. Others saw only ordinariness, even weakness, but in truth, the shadow they dismissed concealed a steel-hard dignity, the dignity of one who had witnessed, lost, and still stood. Each morning the range was filled again with noise and training. Angela kept picking up brass, part of the background. The numbers on her wrist, the shells in her box, were never spoken of. But something was waiting to be revealed, a secret that could not stay hidden forever. A May morning, the Mojave Desert blazed under a merciless sun, like a giant mirror throwing fire back onto the earth. The Fort Irwin range was busier than usual. Not only American soldiers filled the grounds, but also a delegation from across the Atlantic. Crisp British uniforms, boots polished to a shine, their movements sharp and deliberate. At the front was Major Oliver Hartley, once nicknamed the Silver Eye of the Crown. Hartley didn't need to act arrogant. The slow, measured pace of his walk and the way his hand tapped lightly on the sleek rifle he carried were enough to draw attention. His gaze swept over the range, pausing on the targets set between 800 and 1,200 meters, as if they were nothing more than children's toys. The demonstration began. American soldiers took their positions, rifles thundered. Rounds flew, dust-plumed, but the white-painted rings on the targets stayed bare. Most shots clipped the edges or missed entirely. Quiet chuckles mingled with a few disappointed shakes of the head. Hartley smirked. He stepped forward, adjusted his scope, and lay prone with the ease of a man too familiar with proving himself superior. The rifle cracked. 1 second. 2 seconds. A puff of dust bloomed dead center on the 1,200-meter target. The British contingent erupted in applause, cheers echoing, while the American side sank into heavy silence. Rising, Hartley turned. His cold gray eyes swept across the American officers, then settled on the line of young troops. His voice cut through the desert air, louder than the wind. Perhaps you Americans are better suited to Hollywood films. On a real battlefield, this level of marksmanship is nothing but a joke. The words dropped like a stone, and the entire range fell silent. American officers held their composure, but their hands tightened behind their backs. Some recruits glanced at each other, struggling to swallow their retorts. Then, to drive his contempt deeper, Hartley raised a hand and pointed toward a figure at the far end, the woman carrying a bucket of brass. Her hair tied back, her shirt creased from the sun, her calloused hand gripping the metal handle firmly. Or perhaps, Hartley tilted his head, drawing out the words with mockery, "Let the cleaning lady try. I bet she couldn't hit a target at 500 meters." Laughter burst instantly from the young soldiers. Some nudged each other with elbows, others cast looks of pity mixed with amusement at Angela Ruiz. They thought this would be the evening's entertainment, a joke to retell over dinner. Angela stopped. The heavy bucket swayed, then clanked against the ground. The casings inside rattled together, ringing like an invisible alarm. She straightened her back and turned toward Hartley. Her deep brown eyes didn't blink, no anger, no fear, only a stillness strangely serene. The range fell utterly silent as she spoke. her voice low and roughened by sun and wind. "Not 500 meters, Major." Hartley frowned. Some soldiers stifled their laughter. Angela's next words struck the air like hammer blows. 3,285 meters. One shot only. The number froze the crowd. Nearly 2 miles a distance, even legends whispered about only in books. Angela stood unmoving, her hand loose at her side, but her voice held firm. "If I hit, you apologize to America. If I miss, I'll leave this base forever." A gust of wind swept through, whipping sand into the air. Every eye fixed on the woman once dismissed as a shadow collecting brass. No one spoke, but the silence pressed heavier than any insult. A veteran had just placed herself in a public trial against arrogance and against the world. The brass in the bucket clinked softly, as if reminding them all, a new chapter had just begun. The murmurs still lingered in the air as Angela stepped out of the shade, walking toward the firing line. The Mojave Desert blazed, sunlight pouring down on each grain of burning sand, as if testing both flesh and steel. Dozens of eyes followed her, some waiting for her to back down, others eager for a humiliating fall. Angela set the bucket down, letting the brass casings clatter against one another, their sharp echo cutting the silence. She knelt, pulling a worn .300 Winchester Magnum from its cloth wrap. The rifle bore no shine, no modern optics, only the old companion that had followed her through Afghan mountains. The stock, darkened with sweat, carried scars etched deep like memories. She stripped off her gloves, letting bare skin rest against the wood. Her calloused hands stayed still, as if finding her own heartbeat in the cold grain. For a moment, the laughter and stares faded. There was only sand, wind, and the stretch of nearly 3.3 kilometers lying ahead. Angela lay prone, cheek pressed against the stock. Through the old scope, the distant white target shimmered in mirage. Desert gusts whipped hard, carving thin, knifing currents. To others, it was an impenetrable wall. To Angela, it was an equation of wind, humidity, heat, and memory. She drew in a deep breath, not the gasp of nerves, but the measured breath she had once taken with fallen teammates beside her, with only static left on the radio, when calm was the only path to survival. Inhale, hold, exhale, once, then again. The wind hissed past her ears, carrying the scorched tang of brass. For a heartbeat, she remembered the wooden box in her room, the shells she polished each night with a soft cloth. Each casing recalled someone who never came back. And now, in every beat of her heart, they were there beside her. Her finger found the trigger. Pressure built slowly, increment by increment, not rushed, not trembling. No one could hear her heartbeat, yet everyone felt the air thicken, as if the desert itself held its breath. Then the rifle cracked, splitting the silence. The Winchester bucked. Dust leapt from the sand. The round tore free, vanishing into the open sky, leaving behind an invisible arc. Time stretched unbearably thin. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 5. Far out, the white target twitched. A plume of dust burst dead center. In that instant, the world collapsed into absolute stillness. Every laugh, every whisper evaporated. Only the pounding of hearts filled the silence, eyes locked on the pierced target. And then eruption. Shouts, cheers, applause crashed over the range like a tidal wave. The young soldiers who had mocked her gaped, mouths open. Some rubbed their eyes, unwilling to believe. Even the American officers froze, then gripped one another's hands tight. Hartley, arrogant only moments before, stood stunned, his face stiff, lips pressed pale. The familiar smirk was gone. Angela, meanwhile, rose calmly. She brushed dust from her knees, slung the rifle over her shoulder. No triumphant smile, no waving for praise. To her, it wasn't a performance, only a task completed, a reply precise, and nothing more. A few of the young soldiers bowed their heads. They realized the woman they had mocked as a brass picker was no shadow at all. She carried within her an accuracy paid for in blood. But Angela didn't look at them. She quietly walked back to the bucket, lifting it as though finishing an ordinary shift.
Only the dust clinging to her shoulders remained, and her steady gaze fixed on the horizon. Dear audience, grab a glass of water, take a moment to relax, and keep listening to the story. The twists are still to come. And please drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a joy to see who's joining us from around the world. Drop a 1 in the comments if you find this story gripping, so we can keep bringing you more captivating tales.
The next morning, Fort Irwin woke up to a completely different atmosphere. The dusty red roads leading to the firing range buzzed with whispers. The night before, phones across the barracks lit up. The video of that impossible shot spread faster than desert wind. The young recruits who had laughed the day before now looked at each other, no longer bold enough to spit out their mockery. They whispered in the mess hall, "Who is she really? No way. Over 3,200 meters?" Some rushed to search Angela Ruiz's name in the system, but the record held only a few dry lines. Sergeant, Afghanistan, wounded, discharged. No photos, no details, as if the rest had been erased. The emptiness only deepened the mystery. Military press quickly picked it up. An internal news sheet ran a bold headline: "Purple Heart Woman hits the impossible target." Below it, a photo of Angela rising, brushing dust from her knees. No triumphant stance, only calm. And it was that very calm that gave readers goosebumps. Senior officers, who had stayed silent during the demonstration, now murmured behind closed doors. They knew the power of an image. In an age where national pride could be defined by a single click, Angela's shot could become a symbol. But symbols still demanded proof. Hartley, the man at the center of humiliation, could not swallow defeat so easily. In a televised interview on a European military channel, his face remained cold, but his gravelly voice betrayed him. We'll see whether that was just a one-time fluke or truly legendary. Right before the cameras, Hartley issued a public challenge, not in the Mojave Desert but in Wyoming, where the upcoming NATO-supervised international sniper competition would take place. Mountain valleys, high plains winds, brutal terrain. A stage where every shot would be recorded, analyzed, and broadcast live to millions. The news spread even faster than yesterday's bullet. In a small cafe near the base gate, soldiers argued hotly. Some worried, if she fails, everyone will say yesterday was just luck. Others lowered their voices with hope. If she does it again, that will be history. Angela was different. That afternoon, she was seen again in her small quarters, sitting beside the old wooden box. The shell casings were still neatly lined up, glowing under the sunset. She quietly picked them up, her fingers tracing the scratches. No press, no crowd for her. Hartley's invitation wasn't just a challenge. It was a chance to answer on behalf of those who had fallen on 11/19. In the days that followed, Fort Irwin felt like an unofficial stage. Older officers found ways to approach her, half out of curiosity, half respect. Recruits who once mocked her now awkwardly saluted when they passed. Some even quietly cleaned the range for her, as if to make up for their laughter. Angela's routine never changed. At dawn, she inspected the targets. At dusk, she cleaned the old Winchester piece by piece, as patiently as if rereading a diary written in metal. Only one thing was different. Her gaze stretched further toward the horizon where Wyoming waited. Hartley, meanwhile, milked the media. He appeared in broadcasts, describing the Fort Irwin shot as an amusing spectacle, while stressing that real combat cannot rely on coincidence. The British team expressed full confidence. Wyoming would prove who the true master was. The event grew international. NATO released the list of teams: US, UK, Canada, Poland, each sending their best shooters. Yet the name sparking the most noise wasn't on the official roster but in rumor: Angela Ruiz, the Purple Heart Woman. In Washington, defense advisors began to argue. In what capacity should she compete? Could a contract worker, no longer active duty, represent the United States? But in the hearts of the Fort Irwin soldiers, the answer was already clear. They whispered to one another, "She represented us the moment she pulled the trigger at 3,285 meters." The wave spread wide. The story of the brass picker woman who challenged a British officer became a sensation. Headlines blared, social media erupted, and even veterans across America sent handwritten letters to the base, praising and encouraging her. Angela, once a silent shadow, now stood in the center of the spotlight. But the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. Wyoming wasn't just a competition, it was an open battle before the world. One slip, and everything she had done would be buried under two words: just luck.
The Wyoming wind cut across the face like the edge of a cold blade. The plateau stretched endlessly, scattered with gray rock and withered grass. Above, the sky was so clear the clouds seemed frozen, yet the fickle currents shifted every second, an invisible enemy to any sniper. The international sniper competition officially began. Dozens of teams from the US, UK, Canada, Germany lined up along the firing bays. Television cameras swept across, capturing every movement, broadcasting live to millions. Stands were packed with military spectators, veterans, and NATO officers. Angela Ruiz, in a plain uniform without insignia, stepped into the arena. Around her, marksmen carried rifles with state-of-the-art optics, digital wind meters, and finely tuned weapons. She carried only experience and the eyes that had learned to read the desert winds of Afghanistan. The first day brought little to boast of. At 1,200 meters, several of her rounds drifted wide. Her ranking sank to the bottom of the board. Some reporters smirked, dismissing her as a viral fluke. From a distance, Hartley allowed himself a visible grin. The second day told a different story. When the winds shifted without warning, teams relying on machines began to falter. Angela, instead, watched the sway of grasses, the thin ribbons of mist across the plateau, the way birds curved their wings on rising air. She aimed, fired, and her scores began to climb. The sight stirred old rumors from Afghanistan. She reads the wind by instinct, as if she hears the language of the sky. By the end of the second day, Angela had broken into the top 10. News outlets lit up. Purple Heart veteran back in the fight. Recruits at Fort Irwin phoned each other, cheering in their barracks as if watching the Super Bowl. Then came the final day, the ultimate trial. A target at 3,500 meters. Every team required to use the same Barrett MRAD rifle, firing standard NATO rounds. No gadgets, no advantages. This was no longer a contest of equipment. It was a contest of human will. The stands overflowed. U.S. generals filled the seats of honor, with the British delegation facing them across the aisle. Press cameras stood ready for the decisive moment. In the crowd, old veterans in worn jackets kept their eyes fixed on the lone woman stepping onto the firing line. Angela lay down. The world narrowed into her scope. Her breathing slowed, steady. The entire grandstand seemed to hold its breath with her. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked back hard. The round ripped into the wind. 1 second, 2, 3, 4, 4.9 seconds stretched like an eternity. Impact. The bullseye burst open, a perfect hole at the very center. For a moment, no one believed it. Then the stands erupted. Cheers roared across the mountains, applause thundered like a storm. Americans embraced one another. A U.S. general crushed his aide's hand in a fierce shake, pride burning in his eyes. The cameras swung to Hartley. His face flushed, his jaw clenched tight. For a few seconds, he stood frozen. Then, under the gaze of a world watching, he stepped forward. Angela rose, brushing grass from her uniform. Hartley stopped before her. Silence blanketed the range. Then he extended his hand. His voice dropped, clear and steady. "Apologies. You have proven that courage knows no gender, no nation, no rank." Cameras flashed furiously. The moment a proud British officer bowed his head to a woman once dismissed as a brass picker spread instantly across the globe. Angela gave a small nod, shook his hand, then stepped back. No smile, no tears, but in her eyes, Something had closed, as if an old chapter had finally found its ending. Angela's first morning back at Fort Irwin after Wyoming, the base seemed to wear a different face. No longer were there pitying glances or mocking laughs. As she walked through the gate, the recruits who once jeered now stood at attention, some awkwardly snapping their heels together. The silence wasn't contempt anymore, it was respect. Angela didn't return to her old bucket. Instead, she stepped into the small training room beside the range. On the long wooden table, she laid out polished brass casings, each gleaming like gold, lined up as though they were pages in a chronicle of metal. Recruits filed in. They weren't sure what to call her. Sergeant? Instructor? Or just, ma'am? Angela didn't answer. She simply motioned for them to sit. She lifted a casing, letting the afternoon light catch its surface until it shimmered. Then she asked, "What do you see here?" A young soldier answered, hesitant. "Trash?" Angela smiled, a rare smile, not bitter but gentle. She shook her head. "Number, this is memory. Each casing is a fallen comrade, and it's our responsibility to make the next shot worthy of them." The room fell silent. A few eyes grew red. Recruits who once saw the rifle as just a skill now saw it as a bond to life, to sacrifice. The evening sun poured through the window, striking the shelf of brass. What was once waste now glowed like a legacy. In that moment, the room felt like a chapel, and Angela the keeper of its flame. News from Wyoming had carried her name beyond the military. The press called her the woman who fired the world's longest shot. Veterans across America sent handwritten letters, some with shaky lines. "Thank you for making us hold our heads high." A high school in Texas even hung her photo in the hall beside war heroes. But Angela's life didn't change. The same small room, the same nightly ritual of cleaning her rifle, the same wooden box of keepsakes. The only difference, instead of hiding them, she shared them. Recruits were allowed to touch the casings, to hear the story of each comrade, each mission. For them, it was a lesson more vivid than any textbook. One afternoon, mid-lesson, Angela paused. Outside the window, the desert glowed crimson in the sunset, the wind lifting clouds of dust. She remembered Wyoming, the shot that took nearly 5 seconds to land. 5 seconds that felt like a lifetime and enough to change one. In the hush, a question stirred in her mind. Was this only the beginning? A month later, the Pentagon sent an official letter, an invitation to join the Advanced Sniper Training Program to instruct both American and Allied troops. No pressure, just an offer. But within the military community, it was recognition made public. Angela Ruiz was no longer the woman who picked brass, but a living symbol. Before signing, Angela returned to the range with her old bucket of casings. She spilled them out, metal flashing in the sunday. A few soldiers passing by stopped, expecting her to pick them up like before. But instead, she left them there, gleaming on the sand. Then she walked away, lightly. She didn't need to carry them anymore. Memory was no longer a burden, it had become a shared legacy. That night, the base was quiet. Angela sat on a wooden chair outside the barracks, the cool wind brushing past. In her hand was a single casing, the first she had picked up in Afghanistan. On 11/19, she rolled it between her fingers, the moonlight flashing like a salute. Then she placed it on the shelf in the training room, where all could see. One chapter closed, another began. Angela Ruiz, once the forgotten shadow, had become the flame that lit faith in an entire generation of American soldiers. And you, my dear audience, brace yourselves for the next twist in this jaw-dropping story. So, before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're truly loving what I'm doing here. And drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always a thrill to see who's joining us from all corners of the globe.